Mother Bear begs soldier for help. What happens next is unbelievable. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The morning frost clung to the Alaskan wilderness like a silent predator, creeping over every branch, every stone, every soldier standing guard at Outpost 17. The base had seen its share of harsh winters and strange happenings, but nothing could have prepared them for what would unfold that day. Captain Richard Alden, a seasoned veteran with over 20 years in the service, was just finishing his morning coffee when the alarms blared. The security fence had been breached. Soldiers rushed to their stations, weapons drawn, eyes scanning the perimeter for threats. But what they saw was unlike anything they had ever encountered. A massive brown bear, easily 800 pounds of raw power and primal instinct, had forced its way through the reinforced barrier. But it wasn't attacking. It wasn't snarling or charging. Instead, it lumbered forward, its head lowered, its posture almost pleading. It stopped in front of the main command building, just feet from where Captain Alden stood. And then, to the shock of every soldier present, the beast did something extraordinary. It bowed. Alden's grip tightened on his rifle, though he didn't raise it. His men exchanged uncertain glances, waiting for an order. But how did one respond to a bear asking for help? "Hold your fire," he said at last, his voice steady despite the strangeness of the moment. The bear lifted its head, its dark eyes locking onto Alden's. There was something in them, not fear, not aggression, but desperation, a deep, bone-aching need. And then it made a sound, not a growl, not a roar, but a low, mournful cry. Sergeant Bill Harlow, the base's closest thing to a wildlife expert, stepped cautiously forward. "Captain, she's a mother." Alden's eyes flickered to the bear's underside, now visible as she shifted her weight. Harlow was right. The bear was nursing, but there were no cubs in sight. "Where are they?" Alden murmured, half to himself. Then he noticed something else. The bear's fur was wet, clumped with ice. She had been in the water, recently. A realization struck him like a thunderclap. "Check the river," he ordered. 3 soldiers set off at once, rushing through the snow-dusted pines toward the nearby glacial stream. Minutes passed like hours as the bear remained in place, waiting, shivering. Then came the shouts. "We found them!" Alden didn't hesitate. He ran, his breath misting in the frigid air. When he reached the riverbank, his stomach clenched. 2 bear cubs, barely the size of shepherd dogs, were clinging to the icy bank, their tiny bodies soaked and trembling. One had stopped moving altogether. They must have fallen in, their mother unable to pull them free from the frozen current. She had done the only thing she could. "Gone for help. Get them warmed up," Alden barked. "Now! Now!" The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, wrapping the cubs in emergency blankets, rubbing their fragile bodies to stimulate circulation. The bear mother had followed, her massive frame now just feet away. But she made no move to interfere. She trusted them. For nearly an hour the men worked. The first cub stirred quickly, letting out a tiny, pitiful cry that sent the mother into a soft rumble of relief. But the second one, it remained still, too still. Alden knelt beside it, pressing 2 fingers gently against its chest. He felt nothing. His jaw tightened. "No," he muttered, "not after all this." He began compressions, careful but firm. A soldier passed him a thermal pack, which he pressed against the cub's small body. The mother bear watched in absolute silence, her entire world hanging on the actions of a human man. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then a cough, a sputter, a shuddering breath. The cub gasped, then whimpered weakly. The mother bear made a chuffing sound, stepping closer, but she did not snatch them away. She waited. Finally, Alden nodded. "They'll be okay." The soldiers unwrapped the cubs, placing them gently on the snow. Their mother wasted no time, nudging them close, licking their damp fur. She turned back to Alden, holding his gaze once more. Then, she did something none of them would ever forget. She stepped forward, just enough to close the space between them, and touched her cold, wet nose to his hand, a gesture of thanks. No one spoke, no one moved. And then, as quietly as she had arrived, the great bear gathered her cubs and disappeared into the forest. The base remained silent long after she was gone. Years later, Captain Alden would look back on that day, that single impossible moment, and still struggle to put it into words. But deep in his heart, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes, trust defied nature itself. The journey into the frozen wilderness tested every ounce of endurance the team possessed. Captain Alden adjusted his gear, his breath visible in the bitter Alaskan air. The bear, whom Sergeant Bill Harlow had taken to calling Alaskan, moved with determined purpose, her massive paws cutting deep impressions into the snow. Every few minutes she would glance back, those intelligent eyes filled with urgency. "What do you think we're walking into?" one of the soldiers muttered, his voice barely carrying over the howling wind. Alden didn't answer. He was thinking the same thing. What could have driven this mother bear to break every instinct of self-preservation and seek out humans? More importantly, what danger awaited them at the end of this path? As they pressed forward, the forest thickened, the skeletal trees standing like silent sentinels. Then, without warning, Alaskan stopped. She let out a low, guttural sound, something between a growl and a whimper. Harlow stepped forward, scanning the landscape with his trained eyes. "Something's wrong." The bear moved toward a rocky incline, her body tensing. Alden followed her gaze and froze. A jagged ravine sliced through the forest floor, a deep chasm where the ice had given way. At the bottom, half buried beneath a layer of snow and debris, something stirred. Dear God, Harlow breathed. "There's something down there." The team quickly spread out, assessing the situation. Through the blowing snow, they saw what looked like a den that had partially collapsed, and inside it, barely visible, were two tiny cubs, alive but motionless. Alden's heartbeat quickened. "We need to get them out. Now!" The soldiers moved swiftly, tying ropes around a sturdy tree. One of them, Specialist Ryan, volunteered to descend. As he rappelled down, the mother bear paced anxiously, her massive claws raking the snow. "Easy, girl," Alden muttered. "We're helping." The wind howled as Ryan reached the cubs. One was breathing weakly, but the other was completely still. Ryan scooped them up, cradling them against his chest before giving the signal to be pulled up. The moment he reached the edge, the mother bear surged forward, nuzzling them frantically, her heavy breath gusting against their tiny, fragile forms. Harlow moved to check the cubs. "This one's got a pulse," he said, pointing to the weaker one. Then he turned to the motionless cub, pressing his fingers against its small chest. "But this one," he hesitated. "It's barely hanging on." Alden didn't think, he acted. Pulling off his gloves, he placed his hands over the cub's tiny rib cage and began compressions. The other soldiers stood back, silent, watching their commander do something they never expected to see. A hardened military leader attempting to resuscitate a dying bear cub. "Come on, little one," Alden murmured. He pressed again. Again. He didn't stop. Then, a shudder. A gasp. A tiny, ragged breath. Harlow exhaled in relief. "It's alive." Alaskan let out a deep, resonant sound, somewhere between a sigh and a growl. She licked her cubs, her massive body blocking the wind from reaching them. But the danger wasn't over yet. The storm was worsening, and the trek back would be even more treacherous. "We need to get moving," Alden ordered. He turned to the bear. "Can you walk with them?" Amazingly, she understood. She lifted one cub gently in her jaws, while Alden wrapped the other in his thick coat, shielding it from the icy wind. The return journey was brutal. Snow lashed against their faces, the wind fighting them with every step. Alaskan stumbled once, nearly dropping her cub, but she pushed forward with unwavering determination. By the time they neared the base, exhaustion threatened to pull them all down. But when they reached the perimeter fence, something extraordinary happened. The bear stopped. She turned to Alden, looking at him, not as prey, not as an enemy, but as something else entirely. A friend. Then, with one last lingering glance, she took her cubs and disappeared into the wild. For a long time, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind, whispering through the trees. Harlow let out a breath. "That," he said, shaking his head, "is a story no one's ever going to believe." Alden watched the fading silhouette of the bear, feeling something deep within him shift. "Doesn't matter," he murmured. "We know the truth." And with that, they turned back toward the base, forever changed by the impossible bond between a soldier and a mother bear. The weight of the moment settled heavily on Captain Richard Alden's shoulders. Every second counted. The mother bear, Alaskan, paced anxiously, her deep huffs cutting through the frozen air. Her instincts told her to intervene, to protect her cubs, but something in her trusted these humans. It was a fragile balance between urgency and caution, and Alden knew one wrong move could send the entire operation spiraling into disaster. Sergeant Bill Harlow knelt at the edge of the collapsed shaft, his sharp eyes scanning the pit's icy walls. "We'll need to go in manually," he said grimly. "The ice is too unstable for heavy equipment. If we disturb it too much, it could collapse completely." Alden exhaled, nodding. "You'll go down?" "No offense, sir, but you're not exactly the lightest of us," Harlow said. "We need someone smaller, faster." Specialist Ryan, the youngest and leanest member of the team, stepped forward. "I'll do it." Alden studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, but we're doing this by the book. Secure every line. No unnecessary risks." The team moved like a well-oiled machine, securing ropes and positioning themselves strategically around the pit. Every movement was calculated. Ryan double-checked his harness and gave a thumbs up before carefully lowering himself into the icy darkness. The moment his boots touched the ground, the larger cub let out a faint cry. It wasn't much, but it was enough to tell them there was still time, just barely. "The smaller one's not responding," Ryan called out, his breath fogging in the freezing air. "We need to get them out now." Alden clenched his jaw. "Ryan." One at a time, the first cub, though weak, still had enough strength to nuzzle against Ryan's hands as he carefully wrapped it in a thermal blanket. With practiced efficiency, the team pulled the bundle up, handing it to Harlow, who immediately started rubbing warmth back into its tiny body. Then came the real challenge. The smaller cub. Ryan crouched, pressing 2 fingers against its frail body. "It's cold. Too cold." He adjusted his radio. No heartbeat. Silence fell over the team. Alden's chest tightened. "We're not losing that cub." Ryan didn't hesitate. He pressed his hands over the cub's tiny chest and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. "Come on," he murmured. "Come back." Seconds passed like hours. Alaskan let out a low, mournful sound above them, her breath heavy with worry. Then, a shudder. A faint breath. Ryan's voice cracked with emotion. "It's alive! Ryan!" A chorus of relieved sighs echoed through the clearing. "Get them up now," Alden ordered. As the team carefully pulled Ryan and the second cub to safety, the mother bear stepped forward, her massive frame looming over them. The soldiers instinctively tensed, but Alaskan did not react aggressively. Instead, she nudged her cubs gently, her massive paws trembling as she sniffed them over. Then, in a moment that none of them would ever forget, she turned her gaze to Alden. There was no fear in her eyes, no animalistic rage, only gratitude. The wind howled through the trees, the temperature continuing to drop, but in that moment, something profound had shifted. "We need to get back," Harlow finally said, his voice breaking the spell. "These cubs still need warmth." Alden hesitated, then turned to Alaskan. "You take care of them now." The bear let out a soft chuff, gathering her cubs close to her chest. The team watched in silent awe as she curled protectively around them, using her thick fur to shelter them from the elements. Harlow exhaled. "I think that's a yes." With one last lingering glance, Alden gave the signal to move out. The soldiers retreated carefully, giving the bear her space. But even as they disappeared into the forest, he could still feel her eyes on them. The trek back to the base was long and grueling. The storm had intensified, whipping at their faces, but there was a warmth in their hearts that not even the harshest winter could extinguish. By the time they reached the perimeter, the base lights cutting through the darkness, Alden turned back for one last look. Somewhere out there, a mother bear and her 2 cubs were alive because of what they had done tonight. Harlow clapped a hand on Alden's shoulder. "That's a story for the ages, Captain." Alden let out a tired, satisfied sigh. "Some stories don't need telling," he murmured. "Some you just carry with you." And as the snow continued to fall, they stepped through the gates, forever changed by the impossible bond between man and beast. The moment the wall gave way, Captain Richard Alden felt his pulse hammer in his throat. The sharp crack of ice breaking echoed through the clearing, followed by the sickening sound of debris tumbling down into the shaft. The mother bear, Alaskan, let out a distressed growl, stepping forward as though she might dive in herself. "Hold your positions!" Alden barked, his voice cutting through the chaos. Sergeant Bill Harlow was already reacting. "Keep pulling, steady hands, we're almost there." Chunks of frozen earth rained down, dusting the soldiers with flecks of ice and snow. The first cub let out a sharp cry, flailing in the harness. Harlow clenched his teeth, adjusting his grip on the rope to compensate for the shifting weight. If the cub panicked too much, it could tangle itself and slip free. "Easy, little one," he murmured. Slowly, painfully, they inched the harness higher. The mother bear let out another soft huff, as if urging her baby to hold on just a little longer. Then, at last, the cub reached the surface. Alden dropped to his knees, hands moving swiftly to loosen the harness. As soon as it was free, the cub tumbled forward on unsteady legs. It barely had time to register its surroundings before Alaskan swept it up with her massive paw, pulling it against her warm, protective body. Alden let out a long breath, one down. But the second cub, "Ryan, status?" Alden called down. Specialist Ryan's voice crackled through the radio. "Still breathing, but barely." That falling debris didn't help. Alden exchanged a look with Harlow. They had to move faster. "Lower the second harness." Now, this time they had no time for hesitation. The wind was picking up, the temperature dropping fast. If the smaller cub was going to survive, they needed to act now. Harlow readied the second harness, this one smaller and even more carefully reinforced. With practiced efficiency, they lowered it into the pit. Ryan worked quickly, maneuvering the limp cub into position. Unlike its sibling, this one barely moved, its body cold and unresponsive. Alden felt the mother bear's gaze on him, her massive body tense with expectation. Did she understand that this was her last chance to save her baby? The thought unsettled him, but he had no time to dwell on it. "Lift!" the team pulled, each motion carefully synchronized. The second cub's smaller frame made it easier to maneuver, but its lack of movement made every second feel heavier with dread. Come on," Harlow muttered under his breath. Halfway up, a gust of wind rattled the trees, sending another small cascade of ice into the pit. The mother bear let out a low, guttural sound, a mix of warning, and worry. Then, just as the cub neared the top, its fragile body twitched. Alden reacted instantly, dropping to grab it before it could slip. His gloved hands closed around the tiny bear's cold fur, pulling it the last few inches to safety. The moment it was free, the mother bear surged forward. The soldiers tensed, instincts kicking in. But Alaskan didn't attack. Instead, she sniffed the motionless cub, nudging it with her broad nose. When it didn't respond, she let out a low, mournful cry. Alden's throat tightened. "Not yet," he muttered. "We're not losing this one." He didn't think, he simply acted. He rubbed the cub's chest, pressing carefully, coaxing warmth back into its tiny frame. Harlow knelt beside him. "Captain, it's been under for too long. Not giving up." Alden pressed again. "Come on, little one." The mother bear hovered, her breaths quick and uneven. The tension in the air was suffocating. Then, a gasp. The cub stirred weakly, its tiny mouth opening in a faint cry. Alden let out a shaky breath. "There you go." The mother bear wasted no time. She scooped the smaller cub close, holding it tightly against her chest. For a moment she simply stood there, her great head lowering over her babies, sheltering them from the world. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze to Alden. It was a look he would never forget. Gratitude. Pure, undeniable gratitude. Alden took a step back, nodding once. "You take care of them now." The bear lingered for only a moment longer. Then, with a deep breath, she gathered her cubs and began to move, disappearing into the tree line. The soldiers remained frozen in place, watching her go. No one spoke. No one needed to. Harlow finally exhaled. "That's gotta be the strangest damn mission we've ever had." Alden let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. And the most important, as the wind howled around them, the team packed their gear, the weight of what had just happened sinking in. They had just witnessed something beyond protocol, beyond science, something raw and real. As they made their way back to base, Alden glanced over his shoulder one last time. The forest had swallowed the bear and her cubs, leaving only the memory behind. But he knew without a doubt that somewhere out there, Alaskan would remember them too. Sergeant Bill Harlow wiped the sweat from his brow, despite the freezing air, as he double-checked the knots securing his harness. The situation had escalated from dangerous to nearly impossible. Captain Richard Alden stood beside him, his jaw tight as he surveyed the fragile shaft walls. They were on borrowed time. Miller, their wildlife expert, had gone down, but his radio crackled with static-filled urgency. "The cub's barely breathing," he reported. "And it's buried deeper than I thought. We need to move fast." The mother bear, Alaskan, was growing more anxious by the second. She let out low, guttural sounds, shifting on her massive paws, her muscles coiled with tension. Yet, she did not interfere. She was entrusting them with her last cub, despite every instinct screaming at her to act. The weight of that trust bore down on Alden like a boulder. Harlow readied himself to assist Miller. "If that cub is still alive, we're getting it out. No matter what." Alden's voice was firm. "No unnecessary risks. Get in, get the cub. Get out." The rope system was adjusted, and Harlow was carefully lowered into the unstable shaft. The bitter cold bit at his exposed skin as he descended into the pit's eerie darkness. Ice cracked under his boots as he landed, sending fresh fragments tumbling around him. Miller was already digging frantically through the loose dirt and ice that had partially buried the cub. "It's weak, but there's still a pulse." Harlow knelt, pressing his hands around the cub's tiny body, feeling how fragile it was beneath its frost-covered fur. The tiny bear let out the faintest of whimpers, barely audible over the wind, howling through the shaft. "We have to be careful," Miller warned. "Its body temperature is dangerously low. If we move it too fast, the shock could stop its heart." Harlow cursed under his breath. Then we stabilize it here before we pull it up. Above, Alden was tracking the situation second by second. He could feel the ice shifting beneath his boots. Time was running out. You've got 3 minutes. After that, we risk losing the whole structure. Miller and Harlow worked in practice coordination. They wrapped the cub in a thick emergency blanket, tucking heat packs inside to warm its tiny frame gradually. Harlow secured the cub in a specially modified harness, designed for maximum support without constriction. Then, the ground trembled. A deep, groaning crack rippled through the frozen shaft. Alden's radio blared with Miller's alarmed voice. "The walls are coming down. Get us up now." Alden didn't hesitate. "Pull them up, now!" The ropes strained as the team above heaved with all their strength. Harlow clutched the cub close as he was lifted, his heart pounding. "Gah!" Miller was just behind him, but the moment his feet left the ground, a deafening crash shook the entire shaft. A cloud of snow and ice erupted into the air. For one horrifying moment, Alden thought they had lost them both. Then, through the swirling dust, Harlow's form emerged, dangling just below the edge. The cub, still wrapped in the blanket, was pressed tightly against his chest. Miller followed seconds later, coughing but unharmed. The moment Harlow's boots touched solid ground, Alaskan surged forward. Every soldier tensed, hands hovering over their weapons, but she ignored them. Her massive head lowered, her nose brushing against the cub's tiny form. Alden had never seen anything like it. A creature capable of tearing through steel fencing was now nuzzling her fragile baby with the gentleness of a whisper. The cub let out a weak, pitiful cry. It was alive. The mother bear's deep, rumbling chuff vibrated through the air, a sound of comfort, of relief, of gratitude. She curled her body around both cubs, shielding them from the wind. Her golden-brown fur covered in frost and dirt, but radiating warmth. Alden exhaled, finally allowing himself to feel the victory. "We did it." Harlow, still catching his breath, let out a shaky chuckle. "That was hands down the most insane thing I've ever done." The rest of the team stood in silent awe. What had begun as an impossible mission had turned into something none of them could fully explain. A bear, understanding enough to seek help. Soldiers, breaking every protocol to give it. A bond that should never have existed, yet, somehow, did. Alaskan lifted her head and looked at Alden. Not with fear, not with hostility, with trust. The bear stayed only a moment longer, pressing her snout briefly against the cubs before turning back toward the wilderness. The two tiny bears wobbled after her, their legs weak but determined. With one last glance at the soldiers, she disappeared into the trees. For a long while, no one spoke. The wind howled around them, but the world felt different now, quieter, heavier. Harlow was the first to break the silence. "So, Captain, how exactly do we put this in the official report?" Alden smirked, his tired eyes filled with something deeper than pride, understanding. "We don't. Some things are meant to stay between us and the wild." As the team gathered their gear and turned back toward base, Alden took one last look at the forest, now empty once more. Somewhere out there, Alaskan was safe with her cubs, and that was all that mattered. The story of the mother bear and her cubs is more than just an incredible tale of survival. It is a reflection of the power of trust, compassion, and courage in our own lives. In a world that often feels divided, where fear and mistrust dictate many of our actions, this story serves as a reminder that sometimes the greatest acts of bravery come not from physical strength, but from choosing to believe in the good of all others, even when it defies logic. The mother bear, driven by an instinct far greater than fear, broke every rule of nature to seek help from humans. She understood that despite the deep-rooted survival instincts that told her to avoid people, they were her cub's best chance for survival. How often do we find ourselves in situations where we are afraid to ask for help? Whether it is due to pride, fear of rejection, or a belief that we must solve our problems alone, we often hold back when we most need support. The bear's actions remind us that true strength is not in isolation, but in recognizing when to reach out and trust those who can help us. Similarly, Captain Alden and his team had every reason to follow protocol and keep their distance. Military training and experience had conditioned them to treat anything unknown as a potential threat. Yet, in that moment, they made a choice not based on rules, but on humanity. They saw the desperation in the mother bear's eyes, and rather than responding with fear, they responded with empathy. In our lives, how often do we encounter situations where we judge others based on assumptions? How many opportunities do we miss to extend kindness because we are conditioned to believe the worst? This story teaches us that taking a chance on compassion can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Another striking lesson from this story is patience. The soldiers didn't simply rescue the cubs and walk away. They stayed. They nursed the cubs back to health, gained the mother bear's trust, and ensured their safety before letting them go. In today's fast-paced world, we often expect immediate results, whether in relationships, careers, or personal growth. But some things take time. Building trust, healing wounds, and making a lasting impact require patience and dedication. The soldiers could have walked away after the initial rescue, but their willingness to see things through made all the difference. Additionally, the long-term impact of this event is significant. Because of this encounter, military protocol changed, leading to the protection of countless other animals who might have faced the same fate. This highlights an essential truth about life. Our actions, no matter how small, can create ripples that extend far beyond what we can see. Every choice we make has the potential to set something greater into motion. Whether it's a simple act of kindness, a decision to stand up for what's right, or a moment of selflessness, we never truly know how far-reaching our impact can be. Finally, perhaps the most touching lesson from this story is that of mutual understanding. Even years later, bears believed to be the same family never showed aggression toward the base, as if they recognized that these humans had once helped them. If wild animals can form connections based on positive experiences, surely we as humans can learn to foster understanding and respect despite our differences. Imagine what the world could look like if we approached life with this mindset, choosing trust over fear, compassion over hostility, and understanding over judgment. At the end of the day, this story reminds us that acts of kindness, no matter how difficult or risky, are always worth it. In moments of fear and doubt, we can ask ourselves, will we be the ones to extend a hand when others are in need? Will we take the risk to trust even when it's easier to turn away? And will we have the patience to see things through, knowing that real change takes time? Perhaps the next time we face a difficult decision, we can remember the mother bear and the soldiers who chose to believe in something greater than fear. And in doing so, we might just change the world, one small act of courage at a time. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more inspiring stories of resilience, hope, and the unbreakable spirit of life. See you in the next story.